Okay, so I want you to think back to a moment where a video game actually made you feel something. Not just excitement because you won a match or you got a good kill. I mean, actually feel something. Like genuinely emotional, maybe even close to tears. For a lot of people, and I mean a lot, that moment was The Last of Us. And here's the thing, when The Last of Us came out in 2013, nobody was ready for it. Like, people knew it was going to be good. The trailers looked incredible, but nobody expected it to hit the way it did. Nobody expected to finish this game and just sit there staring at the screen thinking about what just happened. Because The Last of Us didn't just change how people felt about video games, it changed what people believed video games could actually be. And that's what we're breaking down today. Alright, so to understand why The Last of Us mattered so much, you have to understand where gaming was in 2013. Games were fun, games were exciting, games had great gameplay and great mechanics, but storytelling, emotional depth, characters you actually cared about as human beings, that was rare. Really rare. Most games at that time had stories that were basically just an excuse to move you from one action sequence to the next. The hero saves the world, the bad guy gets defeated, roll credits. Nobody cried, nobody sat and thought deeply about what they just experienced. There were exceptions. Games like Shadow of the Colossus, Red Dead Redemption, BioShock, these had genuinely thoughtful stories, but they were the minority. The general belief in mainstream culture was still that video games were entertainment for kids. They were fun, but they weren't art. They weren't capable of telling stories that rivaled movies or books. And then Naughty Dog, the studio behind the Crash Bandicoot and Uncharted games, released The Last of Us. And that whole conversation changed overnight. So, what was The Last of Us actually about? Because if you haven't played it or watched the show, here's the quick version. It's set 20 years after a fungal infection based on a real fungus called cordyceps turns most of humanity into mindless, violent creatures. Society has collapsed. What's left of the world is run by brutal military zones and desperate survivor groups. You play as Joel, a man who lost his daughter in the very first minutes of the game. 14 years later, he's hardened, emotionally closed off, just trying to survive. And he gets tasked with smuggling a 14-year-old girl named Ellie across the country. And here's what makes it special. Ellie is immune to the infection. She might be the key to a cure. So this journey isn't just a road trip. It's potentially the most important journey in what's left of human history. But the game isn't really about saving humanity. That's the plot. The actual story is about Joel and Ellie, two broken people from completely different worlds who slowly, reluctantly start to care about each other. Joel starts seeing his dead daughter in Ellie. Ellie starts seeing a father figure in Joel. And by the end of the game, you are so invested in these two characters that the ending, which I won't spoil, hits you like a truck. Because Joel makes a choice that is morally completely wrong, and you understand exactly why he made it. And you don't know how to feel about it. That kind of storytelling didn't exist in games before The Last of Us. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't talk about enough. The gameplay in The Last of Us wasn't just good, it was specifically designed to make the story hit harder. Most games give you power. You're a superhero, you have unlimited ammo, you mow down hundreds of enemies without breaking a sweat. It feels good, but it also disconnects you from any sense of real danger. The Last of Us did the opposite. Resources were scarce, ammo was limited. If you got into a fight with 3 or 4 enemies, you might barely survive. You had to think carefully about every single encounter. Do I fight? Do I sneak past? Do I have enough supplies?
And the enemies weren't just obstacles. The human enemies, the hunters and bandits, they talked to each other. They called out for their friends when someone went missing. When you killed someone, their partner would panic and shout their name. Those small details made killing feel heavy. It made you feel the weight of every decision. And the infected, the clickers, especially were terrifying. Not because they were monsters, because they were clearly once human. The fungus had taken over, but underneath it, you could still see what they used to be. That made every encounter with them unsettling in a way that most horror games never achieve.
The gameplay made you feel vulnerable. And when you feel vulnerable, you care more about surviving, about protecting Ellie, about getting to the end. Let's talk about Joel and Ellie specifically, because these two characters are the reason The Last of Us changed gaming forever.
Joel is not a hero. That's the most important thing to understand about him. He's a survivor. He's done terrible things to stay alive. He's selfish. He's violent. And for most of the game, he refuses to open himself up emotionally because the last time he did, he lost everything. Troy Baker voiced Joel, and the performance was incredible. The way Joel moves, the way he talks, the way he looks at Ellie when she's not watching, all of that told a story beyond the words in the script.
Ellie is the opposite. She's young, she's curious, she makes jokes at the worst possible moments, she's terrified, but she doesn't want to show it. Ashley Johnson voiced Ellie, and she completely disappeared into that character. There were moments where Ellie's reactions felt so real and so natural that you forgot you were watching animation. And the relationship between them, the way it slowly builds from reluctant partners to something that feels genuinely like family, that development is what made the ending so devastating. Because by the time you get there, you understand both of them completely. And that makes Joel's final choice feel impossible and inevitable at the same time. No game had ever written two characters this well. This was writing that competed with the best television and film had to offer. So, what actually changed after The Last of Us came out? Because the impact on the gaming industry was real and you can trace it directly. First Studios started investing more seriously in narrative. After The Last of Us proved that a story driven game could sell over 20 million copies and win basically every Game of the Year award, other studios took notice. Games like God of War 2018, Red Dead Redemption 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, all of these put character and story at the center of the experience in a way they probably wouldn't have without The Last of Us showing it was possible. Second, the conversation about video games as art changed permanently. Film critics, literary critics, mainstream media, they all covered The Last of Us as a serious creative work, not as a toy or entertainment product, as a genuine piece of storytelling that deserved to be discussed alongside movies and novels. Third, it proved that games could tackle mature, heavy themes without being gratuitous about it. Loss, grief, morality, what it means to be human. The Last of Us dealt with all of that thoughtfully, and it showed that audiences were ready for that. They wanted that depth. And then the HBO show came out in 2023 and introduced The Last of Us to millions of people who had never touched a controller in their lives. And those people watched it and said, wait, this came from a video game. And that moment changed how an entire generation thought about what games could be. Here's where we are in 2026. The Last of Us is 13 years old, and it still gets talked about as the gold standard for storytelling in games. Every time a new story driven game comes out, the first comparison people make is it as good as The Last of Us?
Most of the time, the answer is no. And that's not an insult to those games. That's just how high The Last of Us set the bar. The Last of Us Part 2 came out in 2020 and pushed things even further better. Gameplay, even more complex characters, even more controversial story decisions. And it divided people in a way that showed how emotionally invested the fan base still was.
That division, that passion, that debate, that's the legacy of The Last of Us. It made people care about a video game story the way they care about their favorite TV show or their favorite movie. It made gaming personal in a way it had never been before. So, to wrap this all up, The Last of Us changed gaming forever because it proved that games could tell stories as powerful and as emotionally complex as anything in film or television. It created two characters that felt completely real. It designed gameplay that served the story instead of fighting against it. And it started a conversation about video games as art that is still happening today.
Before The Last of Us, games were entertainment. After The Last of Us, games were something more than that. And if you haven't played it yet, honestly, what are you doing? Go play it. Then come back and tell me in the comments whether you think the ending was right or wrong, because that conversation never gets old.
Drop a like if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Fucking A! This place is ours! We won't be coming back here no more.